Hi folks, and welcome back to Meaningful Money. Okay, just moved back and along the beach a little bit. You can see St Michael's Mount there, and just over my right shoulder there, just the very edges of Mare Zion. And a few minutes ago in the last video, I was between the two, roughly where my head is. So I had to move back a bit because the sea was encroaching. Now, we're going to talk about inflation, which is a hot topic right now, very much in the news, but most people probably couldn't explain it very well. Hopefully I'll be able to. And certainly might not know what the effect of it is on their everyday lives and their financial planning. So inflation is simply the rise in the cost of goods or services. So an increase in prices, that's all inflation is. So let's take a loaf of bread. Let's say that a loaf of bread today is £1. But that same loaf of bread this time next year, assuming all of the things are the same, so the quality of the bread is the same, the packaging is the same, if that price of bread is next year £1 and 10p, well, that's 10% inflation. The price has gone up by 10%. That's what inflation is. There are some measures of inflation that we use in this country, and you'll probably have heard the terms RPI and CPI. RPI stands for Retail Price Index, and CPI stands for Consumer Price Index. And what both of those things are is baskets of goods and services. Now, the Office of National Statistics will put together what they think is a good sort of cross-section, a spectrum of things which ordinary people buy in their ordinary lives, and give those things a price. So they call it a basket of goods and services, and it includes tons of different things. I'll put a link actually to the PDF so you can see what is in it, but all manner of different things, things like obviously the obvious things like wine and chicken and stuff like that, but also perhaps the cost of making a will, all sorts of goods and services, and there's tons and tons of things. What happens is that every month those things are priced, and the basket of things is given a price as a whole, and the difference in cost between that basket of things this month as against last month, it is the difference. It's the monthly inflation. And that is just designed to give a measure of how prices across the board are going up in this country. So RPI, Retail Price Index, CPI, Consumer Price Index. There's something called RPIX or RPIX as well, which is the same as RPI but doesn't include mortgage interest, right? But all they are indicative values for how prices are rising or falling. Now, it is the responsibility of the Bank of England to keep inflation under control, because too much inflation is a bad thing. Prices rise too fast, which means that wages have to rise to keep pace so that ordinary people can keep buying the things they need to live. That puts strain on businesses, of course, which have to put their own prices up, and so you end up with a spiral of inflation. Too little inflation is also a bad thing because it suppresses the economy. So inflation, you want some of it, but not too much. And it's the Bank of England's job to do that, specifically the Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee, or MPC. Now, they have a target of 2%, and that's 2% for CPI, the Consumer Price Index. Now, currently, unfortunately, that's sitting at 3.7%, so significantly higher than they would like it to be. RPI, for interest, is at 4.8%. So the measure that the Bank of England want is currently at 3.8%, and that simply means that things are 3.7% more expensive now than they were a year ago, right? Simply enough. That's a little bit higher than they would like, though. So the Monetary Policy Committee have some things that they can do to keep inflation under control. But what are the factors that contribute to inflation? What is it that pushes prices up? Well, the first thing is supply and demand. If you think about it, it makes sense. To give a sort of real life example, the harvest last year was a poor one across the world. So that means that the supply of basic foodstuffs like wheat, for example, is less than it was in previous years. So that means there's less of it to go around. So there's less supply, but demand hasn't changed. People still need to eat their bread or whatever, and so the price goes up. So your bread is more expensive now than it was last year. A large factor for that is because there's less wheat around in the world. So supply and demand is a factor. Another big factor is taxation. I'm speaking to you in January 2011, and here in the UK we've just had a VAT rise. So VAT now stands at 20% rather than 17.5%. And so that will feed into inflation over the coming months as things automatically go up in price because the tax on them has risen. There are tons of other factors, or at least there are other theories as to what the factors of inflation might be, and there's all sorts of schools of economic thought which have views on these things, Keynesian economics and such like, far beyond the scope of this and beyond the scope of my tiny brain. But whatever the factors are, there are controls, but not many. There are controls, things that, in our case, the Bank of England can do to keep inflation under control. Now, the main tool that they've got is interest rates. So if inflation is rising, what the Bank of England can do is raise interest rates. Now what that does is, for those of us who have mortgages and credit cards or whatever, then the interest on those payments, and the payments that we make on those things, goes up. So we have less money in our pockets. And that means we might spend a little less on food, entertainment, going out and things like that. And if people stop spending, then what suppliers have to do is they have to reduce their prices in order to attract us to buy again. And so that puts a downward pressure on prices. So the Bank of England, this is why it's a hot topic at the moment, the Bank of England is under some pressure at the moment to consider raising interest rates. They're at record lows of 0.5% at the moment. Should they put them up? Of course, their challenge at the moment is that our economy is pretty fragile at the moment, and they certainly don't want to raise interest rates too quick because they need us to be buying stuff. So they're in a bit of a fine line at the moment. You'll also heard of quantitative easing, which is a pretty technical subject. It's where the Bank of England actually creates money and pumps new money into the system, so there's more money slushing around, so we all feel like we're slightly better off and buy more stuff. But that's far beyond the scope of this. The point is really that inflation can affect your daily lives. And in the next video I'm going to talk about how, specifically when it comes to retirement, but also when planning for the future. So inflation simply is the increase in prices over time, but in the next video I'm going to tell you how that affects your own financial planning. So I hope that basic explanation is useful. Leave any comments or questions under the post here on the website, or on YouTube, wherever, or on Facebook for that matter, and I'll do my best to answer them. But for now, from Maresnarn Beach, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.